Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning. I see most of you all are trickling in here. My name is Ellen Hostetler. I'm the Chief Science Officer for the John Ritter Foundation, so very happy to be with you all today. And I'm also joined today by Bella Marin, who is a research nurse with the John Ritter Research Program. And she's going to be giving us a presentation about what it means to participate in the John Ritter Research Program, and basically the offerings of the research program at UT Health. So just to do a little housekeeping on the first slide here, we do have a chat. Obviously, some of you are already saying hi in that, so that's great. Use that. To start off, maybe everyone could share where they're from. That's always good to see where everyone's joining us from all over the world. And we are going to have a few polls throughout the presentation. So if you would like, please complete those. They're not required, of course. And they aren't anonymous, so the other users can't see what your answers are. They'll just see the results. And then, of course, as usual, we are recording this session, so it will be available on our YouTube channel for viewing later, for you to share with your friends and family or anyone else who might be interested. After Bella's presentation, she will be available for questions. And then we also have Maura joining us on the chat. So she's going to be answering questions throughout as well. Maura also works with the John Ritter Research Program as a clinical research assistant. Probably a lot of you have spoken with her. And then the last two things, just please be kind to each other in the chat and be cognizant to not share medical advice with other people. We're all unique, so we don't want to necessarily be giving medical advice to anyone since we don't know their complete medical information. And then thank you all for being here today. It's always a pleasure to see people from all over the world. I'm seeing we have a number of Canadians coming through, so that's great. So with that, I'm going to turn off my sound and camera so that we can play a welcome video from Meredith O'Neal, who is our CEO and also a research participant and a dissection survivor herself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Meredith Ford O'Neal, the CEO of the John Ritter Foundation for Aortic Health. We are so glad you're here with us for this incredibly important webinar. The mission of the John Ritter Foundation is to raise awareness of thoracic aortic aneurysm and dissection through research, education, and advocacy. The mission says it all. Research is the cornerstone of what we do. We are so proud to have experts on from our sister program, the John Ritter Research Program. We fund the John Ritter Research Program, but it is a separate entity, so we want to make sure that you get to know everybody on their side as well. The research that's being done there and other places throughout the world is incredibly important to our mission and to save families from unnecessary suffering caused by the unknown. So thank you for being here today. Thank you to Dr. Dianna Milewicz, who many years ago approached Amy to see if she could name her program the John Ritter Research Program. And thank you so much to everyone who works there. I personally am extremely invested in the John Ritter Research Program, as myself and my family are participants. And we hope one day we'll know our genetic mutation that led to our dissections, where I was the 5th dissection in 4 generations. And thank you to all the families that came before us and will come after us, because it's so important for us to work together to find the answers. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and we're so happy you're here.
Hello, my name is Greg Weaver, and I live in Austin, Texas. Why am I here today talking to you? Well, I've got quite the family history of aortic aneurysms. My grandfather passed away of aortic aneurysm at the age of 52. My uncle at the age of 26. My father passed away at the age of 42, all 3 of them of aortic aneurysms. Then about 15 years ago, my brother at the age of 36 discovered he had an aneurysm. The good news is he caught it and they were able to replace it. And not only were they able to replace it, the cardiologist at Stanford Medical Center, Dr. David Liang, advised our family to get into a research program run by the John Ritter Research Institute at the University of Texas Houston Health Science Center, a program run by Dr. Dianna Milewicz. So what happened? Well, so they take our DNA, and they took all the DNA from all of our descendants or family members who were alive. They actually took my brother's aorta as part of the DNA sample, and all of that was entered into a research program. So what was the purpose of the research program? It had nothing to do with our family. It was really our family giving to science and giving to aortic health science to help discover the genes, to help to understand what causes these aortic aneurysms that impact so many people all over the world, so many families, generation after generation like ours. And again, that was about 15 years ago. So what happened from there? We were told at that point in time, we'd probably never hear back from anybody, that this was all about research, had nothing to do about our family or them finding a gene or impacting us. Well, 3 or 4 years ago, I get a strange phone call from a Houston phone number. I don't pick it up. The person leaves a very, very long message. As you can see on your iPhones, how long a message is. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. So the next day I checked the voicemail, and it was one of the genetic counselors from the Houston Health Science Center, someone who worked for Dr. Milewicz. And unbelievable, they found the gene. They found the needle in the haystack that has caused our family so much grief for so many years. And what does that mean for us? Well, that means for us, like for myself, I'm the first male that doesn't have the gene in 3 generations. It's unbelievable. And now my 2 boys, who are 22 and 18 years old, they don't have the gene. And so on our side of the family, we've broken this. My brother, knowing that he did have the gene, his family now, one of his kids has the gene. And the great news is now they can track him, and he should never have a fatal impact of an aortic aneurysm. But more important than our family is for all the other families out there and all the other people out there that now the gene is being discovered and being found. So this aortic aneurysm should not be a fatal health impact, where people can live long, healthy lives, even though they may have the gene. It can be tracked. It's amazing. So anyways, all this research has a significant impact to so many different people. Our family was the beneficiary of it after a lot of tragedy, and we're super excited that now through this research, many more people and families will be impacted in a positive way. Thank you very much.
So thank you to Greg for sharing that story. He's been a really amazing advocate for the research program. As he shared, his family has quite a history, unfortunately, of losing people to dissection. So he's a really powerful advocate for the importance of participating in genetic research and how that can really save families. So with that, I'm going to ask Bella to come back on stage here, and I will pull up her presentation, and she will share her thoughts, and we will all learn from her.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Like Ellen said, my name is Isabella Marin, or Bella. So I've spoken with a lot of you who are enrolled in our research program. So I'm a research nurse who works with Dr. Milewicz, both in clinic and in the research lab. So like Ellen said, today I'm going to talk to you all about the John Ritter Research Program in aortic and vascular diseases, which is, like Meredith said, separate from the John Ritter Foundation. So we are a completely own organization, and I would like to explain, and this might be a refresher for some of you who are enrolled, as well as people who may be interested in enrolling. So a little bit of facts about the John Ritter Research Program. You might see it called JRRP for short, whereas with the John Ritter Foundation, you'll see JRF. So the two completely different organizations. So here at the JRRP, we are located at McGovern Medical School at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston. So you might see it called a number of names. So JRRP, McGovern, UT Health. It's all led by Dr. Dianna Milewicz, who's our lead geneticist. The main goal of our research program is to prevent death and disability due to acute aortic dissection. And so a big focus of the research program is gene discovery, so that way we can identify people who are at risk and intervene early before a dissection occurs, because this is preventable. And if we know who's at risk, they can be monitored appropriately, and then things can be caught before they become catastrophic. Another part of our research program is data collection. Data collection helps the wider community, the scientific and medical community, patients, because the specialists are learning to understand the risk factors and the mechanism for aortic dissection. So this can translate to treatment guidelines, again, figuring out who's at risk. And so all of this data helps us put together the knowledge that we have today about this. We have a few studies that are led by Dr. Dianna Milewicz. The main one that I'm going to talk about today is our genetic basis for thoracic aortic aneurysms and dissection study, TAA for short, or you might see it called novel gene discovery study. So, we do focus on other genetic causes for aneurysms and dissections outside of the aorta as well. So we have another study for that. And then even within, we have sub-studies to understand dissection in women who are under the age of 50 or who are pregnant. And then we are also working on identifying environmental risk factors that work together with the genetic predisposition to cause a dissection. So environmental risk factors would be like high blood pressure, or anything else we could pick out from somebody's records to see what could have also increased the risk for a dissection. So main study I'm going to talk about is our TAA study. One other one we have is our known gene study, which I'll touch on a little bit at the end of my presentation. So keep an eye out for that one. I do want to mention that anybody who reaches out to the research program or participates in the study, it's of no cost to the individual. So joining the research study, talking with us, getting the enrollment materials, it will not cost participants anything. And it does not, agreeing or declining to join our research program does not impact your medical care. So it's a completely separate entity from medical care. But when people reach out to us, a study coordinator assesses a person's needs. So, if somebody's just diagnosed with dissection, somebody just lost a family member to dissection, we help walk a person through this diagnosis. So I included the winding road here because some people might feel that this new diagnosis is a complete winding road. They don't even know where to start. They don't know where to go. They don't know what to expect. And so what we do here at the research program is we help make that a little bit easier for somebody. So we use current practice guidelines to review your family's risk and inheritance of this genetic predisposition. So if somebody is interested in pursuing clinical or diagnostic genetic testing, we are also able to provide resources on how to obtain a genetic evaluation. So somebody can choose to enroll in the study while pursuing that clinical testing at the same time. So clinical testing is that medical testing that a doctor orders, and it's diagnostic for a condition that increases the risk for this, whereas research, it's investigative. So timeline of research participation. So this is the amount of time that a person may dedicate to participating in the study. It starts with enrollment. So it's about a 20 to 30 minute phone call with a study coordinator. And we review, eligibility and go over the study in detail with you. So that's enrollment. That's probably the bulk of your time. And then we do check-ins every 1 to 2 years. Which is a 5-minute phone call, web call, or email check-in with participants. So we're looking for, new changes to medical history or new diagnoses in the family history. So it's helpful to keep these research charts up to date so that we have the most current data for that person and family. Another check-in that we might do is to request additional data. So we might reach out to you to recruit additional relatives or request updated medical records. So if you've had recent scans or recent hospitalizations, or you've seen genetics since you've enrolled, then this is something that we would like to have in your research chart. And then the study is ongoing. So the idea is that we're going to continue to work with this data until we learn as much as we can about aortic dissection, but also until we find a causative gene for everybody. So it could take years, and this whole process is repeated as far as checking in, requesting data if we haven't found a gene yet. But if we do find a causative gene for our participants, we do report it back. So you will hear from us if we do find a causative gene. We'll send a letter and then provide some basic counseling on that as well with next steps and what that means for you. So if you don't hear back from us about results, it just means we haven't found a gene to report back to you yet. So it's totally normal to not hear back on results, just because we are needing to find as much evidence as we can to find some of these genes. So this is just a breakdown of what happens at study enrollment. So we discuss eligibility and participation with you. So we'll ask some basic questions about your medical history to determine which study you're eligible for. If you're not eligible, we still provide you with resources. So you don't leave a conversation with us empty-handed. You will still, come out of the connection with us with some amount of information that might be helpful for you and your family. We address any questions or concerns that you might have for us, whether it's about the research program or about thoracic aortic aneurysm and dissection. And then if you agree to participate, we'll collect family history at that time. So you may have seen our pedigrees in past webinars that we use. We're basically drawing out the family tree and then looking for patterns of aneurysm or dissection. And then we talk to you about other family members who might be helpful to enroll. So it's also important to keep that family tree updated with the research study. So if there's updates, always we encourage check-ins with us as well. After that phone call, we mail the saliva collection kit and the paperwork directly to a participant's home. So whatever mailing address you give us, we mail it to you. We provide a return envelope, and you just send it right back to us, and then we'll complete your enrollment. That is the bulk of your participation. So I always tell participants that your saliva sample and your medical records do all of the work for you in this study. So two main components for this novel gene discovery study, or TAA. One is the genetic investigation. So this is where we are trying to find some more genes that can cause thoracic aortic aneurysms and dissections. So we do know some of the genes already that can cause this, and that's where clinical testing comes in. So say somebody meets with a geneticist, they have that genetic clinical testing ordered. They're checked for the genes we already know can cause this. So not all of the genes have been discovered yet, so they're not on the testing panel, because you can't be tested for something that we don't know about. So that's where our research program comes in. So somebody has negative or inconclusive genetic testing or hasn't had genetic testing, and so we enroll them in the study to find these new genes. So this is why we recommend the clinical testing together with the research testing, because ours is primarily investigative as opposed to diagnostic. So what we are doing is we are sequencing people's genes, and we're looking for rare genetic variants that are not found in the general population. So we want to see what stands out in a person who has aneurysm or dissection, because that would be something more suspicious for us to look at, because people in the general population are not just dissecting. So we're looking for rare genetic variants in individuals. So like I said, it's different from clinical genetic testing. The samples in our research lab are de-identified. So if you look at my little picture, they're numbered. So if you look at this picture, it means nothing to you except it's a saliva tube with a number on it. And that's exactly what our lab sees. So they are seeing coded samples when they're sequencing your DNA. So that part of the lab is its own lab. I cannot tell you what they do on that side. I work on the clinical side. So that's a major protection that we have for our participants. Saliva samples are sufficient for this genetic testing that we do, and they last us many years. So there are times we will reach out to somebody to collect additional saliva samples. Sometimes, they don't work with us like they're supposed to, which is not a problem. We'd send a new kit. But we may also work with the participant to collect blood samples. Like Greg in his intro video said, we might also work to collect some aortic tissue, skin samples. So, if this is helpful, we do reach out to participants to help coordinate that for the study if they're agreeing and willing to. So for the most part, saliva does the job in our lab for our analysis. And the last part that I want to mention about this genetic investigation is we can't guarantee the extent of genetic testing. So we can't guarantee the amount of testing somebody's going to get. We also can't guarantee the time frame of testing because we do send the samples out in batches. And then we also can't guarantee that you're going to receive results from the genetic testing. So that's when Greg was saying he enrolled in the study, had no expectation to receive results because we are ideally trying to find some new genes, but it takes a lot of analysis and evidence to find it. So this is why I recommend that clinical testing if you want, an answer sooner, so you can get, that as part of your medical care with the clinical testing. So what happens in the search for a genetic variant? I have this picture here. I'm sure many of you are familiar with computer coding. And so if you make one typo in that computer code, that program is not going to work. Something about it's going to be off, and you have to search where that typo is so you can figure out why it's not working. It's the same thing with our genetic sequence. So DNA is the instruction manual that our cells use to express proteins. And segments of DNA together form a gene. So what we're looking for is a typo in our genetic code somewhere, in the person's genetic code, that could be increasing the risk for dissection. So we don't know where we're looking. It's that needle in a haystack, and that's what takes a lot of time. And we do pick up genetic variants that don't cause any health problems. So I do want to explain the gene and the genetic variant. So a gene, you could just picture it's a whole long list of numbers. So this is a gene, and we're looking for a variant on a gene. So it's going to be somewhere in here in these little parts of the gene that we're looking for that genetic variant that's causative. So, some people will get testing and then they'll find out that they carry a variant in one of the genes that we know about that can cause dissection, but it does not mean necessarily that that variant means that you're at an increased risk for dissection, because those are variants of uncertain significance, and that classification can change. So it depends on where the variant, the alterations occurring in the gene, and it depends what the variant does to the cell function. So I wanted to point that out because I think people get confused with genetic variant. So it just means that it's a variant from the common population genetic code. And so I have some examples here to kind of put it into real life scenarios. So if you look at the words gray and gray here, this is the American spelling and the English spelling. There's one letter off between them. It's an A and an E, but they have the same meaning. They both mean the color gray. So this would be considered a normal genetic variant that does not cause any health problems in somebody. So what we have to do in the lab is figure out what's benign and normal, or what's disease causing or pathogenic. And if you take a look at hired versus fired, they both differ by one letter, but you don't want to be told that you're getting fired instead of getting hired before you even start the job. So it's an important typo that you don't want to make, because it could change the context or the entire meaning of something that you're trying to convey. So this would be considered like a disease-causing variant in that case, because it completely changes the intention of what you're talking about. So this is why it takes a long time, because we have lots of genes to go through and figure out, what looks a little bit suspicious and what's rare and all of that. So say we find some possible genes, what's next? So we have a list of maybe suspicious genes, candidate genes. There is criteria that was put out by the American College of Medical Genetics on how to classify variants. So there's a whole scale going from benign, likely benign, variant of uncertain significance, likely pathogenic, and pathogenic. So there's a whole range of criteria that whoever is reviewing the variant needs to check off to classify it into somewhere on that scale. So that's one thing that we have to do before reporting a gene out, is we need to have that sufficient data to say this gene is causative or pathogenic. We also need to find or confirm variants in that gene in multiple unrelated individuals or families, so that we need to increase, it's more powerful to say, there are different families that carry variants in this gene, and this is responsible for the aortic disease. So it helps to find it in multiple individuals or families, and sometimes we don't have that confirmation in other people, and that's also what could be missing for a gene to be reported out. We also would need to review medical records. So we want to see if the people who carry the gene across these unrelated individuals or families are presenting similarly medically, because that also increases the possibility that, yeah, this gene is disease causing because they're all presenting similarly. They have that same gene, that variant in that same gene. We also need to do a literature review, so we need to see if these variants and these genes have been published already. We need to look at research that gene function, so we can see, oh, okay, this gene affects protein in the aorta. So we need to understand what that gene does functionally. I did skip the functional studies of genetic variants. So that's another thing, is that we find suspicious variants, and we need to study the biological part of the genetic variant. So we need to see how that altered gene is impacting the protein, so we can also get some more data on understanding the mechanism of that gene, and that it could alter it in a way that makes the aorta weaker or something like that. And we need to answer the question, do people who carry the gene have the disease, and their family members who don't have the disease don't carry the gene? So that's what's called gene segregation, is we're looking to see, if the gene tracks with the disease. So that gives us more evidence, because say, somebody who does have a dissection doesn't carry that gene that we find in the family, then that's like, okay, we got to move on and find a different gene. And so that's where, having multiple family members becomes very useful and powerful in finding a gene for people. So people may ask, how do I help research if my gene is still not found? So you are still definitely contributing to research and to our knowledge. So we learn more as we enroll more participants. We are still, constantly enrolling people. There's power in numbers. So there's power in finding more people who have those same genetic variants. Especially because, say, we send your sample out for analysis, we don't find anything on that first round, but say down the line, we find a suspicious gene in another family, we'll go back and we'll look at your data again, and we'll see if you carry a variant in that gene. But it's helpful for us to keep enrolling people and getting, more numbers in the study to really find genes for our unsolved cases. Ideally, a causative gene from everyone will be found through the program, but this can take years. The study's been around since 2010. We still have a lot of work to do, and we are hoping to become quicker with more DNA technologies that are improved, as well as algorithms, machine learning. So the hope is that we will be putting out genes faster for our participants. And then even if we don't find a gene, we're still requesting permission to review medical records. So the data that we obtain from the medical records, it helps us form the knowledge that we know today about the guidelines for thoracic aortic aneurysm and dissection. So you can see in the little chart that I made, some of the things we've learned from research is who's at risk, the risk factors for aortic dissection, and timing of surgical intervention. It's all come from research, not just from our lab, but other labs that have researchers that have studied aortic dissection. So data collection. So the second main component of participation in the novel gene study, or the TAA study, is giving us permission to review relevant medical records. So we send you a HIPAA form with your packet where you basically just list the names of the physicians or hospitals that have records for you related to this. So by you signing that form, we can request the records that we need for the study. Some examples of helpful records that we review are any imaging or scans that you've had of the aorta or other arteries, so any CT scans you've had, MRI scans, echocardiogram. I'm sure you all are very familiar with these. We also request records from the time of dissection. So, maybe you presented to an emergency room and that's when they found it. That's something that we want to look at, because we want to look at your aorta at the time of dissection before surgery was done. That helps us get some very important data as well. We also want to review the surgical notes. So the surgeons ideally go into detail about the size of the aorta and what was done, any valve problems. That's helpful for us to know as well. Genetics note and results report if testing was done. Again, that's helpful because we know that some of the genes that can cause aneurysms and dissection can also cause outward or external physical features. And so if somebody's evaluated by genetics, they typically, check if there's any chest wall deformities, or they look like they have Marfan syndrome. These are features that are also helpful for us to look in the study and that we do track with when we're finding genes. So that's why we request those. We also request cardiology notes. So we want to see, what medications that you're on to get more data on that, as well as, understanding your heart function, the screening, the follow-up that your cardiologist is doing for you afterwards. So this is all helpful, again, in putting together a picture of thoracic aortic aneurysms and dissection. So your medical records are requested by us, and they're protected by our medical school's encrypted servers. So only our approved employees can even view the records. Our IRB, our review board, for that make sure we're in compliance with protecting our participants, approve the people who can view your records. So again, this part of the lab is separate from the lab who sequences the DNA. So there's a kind of checks and balances there where, somebody else is working on your genes and a different team's working on your medical records. So there's not, two people that are tying that together. And so again, clinical team separate from the lab members who work with the DNA. I honestly rarely see our lab people because they are just constantly, working with the cells, and our mice. We have mice as well to learn about thoracic aortic aneurysm and dissection. So the current state of the John Ritter Research Program, this is just a small picture. For enrollment, we have 690 sporadic cases. These are cases where they don't have family history of aortic disease. They're the first person and the only person in their family to present. These are dissection cases only, and under the age of 60. But we do have more numbers that are sporadic, where they're older than 60, they dissected, where they were younger and had an aneurysm diagnosed, under the age of 30, or they also might have some of those connective tissue features where they look like they have Marfan syndrome and other things like that. So we do have more than just the 690 for the sporadic cases. You may also have their parents enrolled. So when we typically have a sporadic case, we try to get the parents enrolled if they're willing, because what we can do is we can see if there's something new in the person who has the disease that neither parent carries that gene because they're not affected. So that gives us very powerful information as well when we're trying to find a gene. It's called de novo when it starts new in somebody, and that's pretty compelling evidence for causative genes. And then we have 1,130 families enrolled. So families are classified by at least 2 or more people in the family who were diagnosed with thoracic aortic aneurysm, or there's history of thoracic aortic dissection. So we have people enrolled, at least 2 who might have the disease, but their siblings, their children, their parents, anybody who might be helpful. We're also talking about that gene segregation, so we can look and see, okay, these people have the disease, they have the gene. These people don't have the disease, they don't have the gene, the disease. So it's very powerful evidence as well. We have close to 10,000 participants. And then of the 1,130 families, 30% of them have been solved. So you can see that we still have a lot more work to do. We still need to collect more data, stay up to date with participants, enroll more family members. And the hope is that, we'd be putting genes out a little bit faster, like I said, with that machine learning coming out and everything. So this is just that novel gene discovery study, but we do have more people enrolled in our genetic basis vascular disease study, where we're trying to find genes for aneurysms outside of the aorta and dissection. So maybe brain aneurysms are running in the family, or if you have moya disease, or if you have, dissections in other arteries. So we're still looking at the vascular disease in other vascular disease as well, and trying to find those genetic causes. So why is a genetic diagnosis important? So as I mentioned, the importance of joining the research study and finding a causative gene is so we can identify individuals who are at risk for thoracic aortic disease. So there's this little kind of flow chart just to kind of walk you through the study again. So we'll start by enrolling the affected individuals. They're the ones who are most likely to carry the gene. So they are, it's very helpful to have the affected individuals enrolled. It increases the chances of us finding the gene, the more affected ones we have. Then we perform the genetic investigation. We review medical records, the functional studies or the biological analysis is done. And here is where it kind of branches off. So we may need more data still to prove the gene discovery, so the cycle will continue. Or if we find a causative gene, we'll report it back to the participant and the family members enrolled. So say we find a gene in another family, your family doesn't carry it, you're not going to know about it because it doesn't affect you. So you only will be notified if you are found to carry the gene directly affects you and your family. So here's a picture of the Weaver family. So Greg, that you saw his video at the beginning of the webinar, they are a family who was solved. So their causative gene was found through the research study. So they no longer have to go through this little cycle of, continuing to do the testing, review medical records and all that. And once a person's gene is found, like he explained, then the family members can be tested, and then only those who carry the gene will need to be monitored closely for aneurysm or dissection. Location of it just depends on what that underlying gene causes, and the gene can tell us some more powerful information, which I'll go over on the next slide. So this is just a little, flow of the research. So this is why it takes years. It's because we have to continue to go through the cycle until we gather as much data, enough data to report a gene back to participants. So continuing on, if we do find a causative gene, we can initiate gene-specific management to prevent aortic dissections or problems with the other arteries. So like I said, if we have the gene, it'll tell us, when surgical intervention might be appropriate at a smaller diameter, at a larger diameter. If there's some, leeway there, it can tell us, if you need to be monitored, not just in the chest or the thoracic part of the aorta, but maybe abdominal, the pelvis for the iliacs, cerebral head and neck imaging for carotids, brain aneurysms. So the gene will tell us that important information, as well as other maybe comorbidities that we have found that track with some of these genes. So it's very useful in medical care, and as well as predicting, figuring out who's at risk to have them implement measures to really reduce the risk of dissection and prevent this from happening, because it doesn't have to happen. And this is different as opposed to our families who are unsolved and don't have a gene, where all the at-risk members need to continue to get screened until we find a gene. So we just can't say who's at risk if we don't have that gene for people. It's kind of just a probability estimate there. And then for people who do have a known gene, or we found their gene, we also have the Montalcino Aortic Consortium study, MAC study for short. Some of you may be familiar with this, but Dr. Milewicz, as well as other collaborators, got together and they started this. It's international, and we're basically recruiting people who carry variants in these genes that can increase the risk for aneurysm or dissection, so we can learn the natural history of each gene. So your participation will not stop with us if you do not want it to. We can continue to collect data and figure out how each gene affects a person, so that can go into our treatment guidelines based on the underlying gene. So there's still a lot more to learn about the genetic causes, but Finding the underlying gene is a big goal for us as well as for families. So it's something that, we really want to figure out who's at risk and prevent this, because like I said, it can be prevented if we figure out who in the family is at risk. So how to become involved? I have this "we want you" puzzle picture here, because genetics is a puzzle. So we want, we need all the pieces. We need the medical records, we need the sample, we need you to all put it together, so we can also figure out, what our community needs, as well as who's at risk. Like I've said a million times, this is important to figure out, what we can do to minimize the amount of dissections occurring. So if you would like to get involved, you can send us an email. We have our email address here. You can contact our main office by phone, and then they'll take your number down, and the study coordinator will reach out to you. And then you can also fill out our survey. If you just type that link in below, the red cap link, it will ask you just a few screening questions, and then you can put your contact info, and then a coordinator will reach out to you. So again, participation is free. It's done from your home. You don't have to leave the house. You don't have to come to Houston. We would love to see you. If you're ever here, you can let us know, but it's not, 100%. It's not necessary to come here, unless you're participating in Dr. Prakash's exercise study, but we can give you more info on that there. We have lots of research going on at UT Health. Dr. Prakash is our cardiologist. So we put that all together to help our community. Mara and I will be addressing the questions at the end of the webinar. And if you reach out to us, we're happy to discuss if you're not sure if you're eligible.
Thank you, Bella. That was great. I thought we had 2 questions come in, so I thought maybe we just hit them now before we do the FAQs. So I think if I push this, it should come up for everyone to see. The person asked, can you have a genetic mutation without having other family members who have dissected? And it sounds like they have a family history with someone, sadly, who dissected quite early at 36. But no other family members. And this is getting a little outside of the context of this webinar, but I think this is a question that probably a lot of people have when there's only one person in the family. Is that possibly still genetic, caused by a genetic predisposition? Is there a reason that person might be inclined to participate in research, and would they be eligible?
Definitely, especially with the age of 36. That is very young to have an aortic dissection. So we very strongly suspect that it's genetic, and it could be new. It could have been something that started in your child. So, other, parents, siblings wouldn't be at risk because it started with the child, that variant, and then they could have passed it on to their kid. There's a 50% chance of passing that predisposition on. But like I said, when I was explaining the sporadic cases that we have, they're under the age of 60. We really need to collect those, because those individuals who have dissections under the age of 60 are they're very much likely to carry a gene, and it would be helpful for us to find a causative gene. So I did want to touch on post-mortem genetic testing and enrollment, because I didn't cover it in the slides. But if somebody's lost a family member to dissection, especially somebody so young, if there was an autopsy done, or maybe they died in the hospital, you can actually work with the medical examiner's office or the hospital to see if there's any sample remaining. And so you could either have it sent for clinical testing to see if they carry one of the genes already known to cause dissection, but you could also send it to our lab, and we could enroll people post-mortem on our study and do genetic analysis to try to find the causative gene. So there's still research opportunities there, but definitely 36 dissection. If the family hasn't seen genetics, I would recommend that they go talk with a geneticist or genetic counselor, or us.
Yeah, that's a really great point about the postmortem testing. I can only just add that oftentimes they save the samples for many, many years. So sometimes people will say, oh, but it was 5 years ago. And typically I found that they will hold on to them for years in medical examiners' offices and hospitals as well. So I think the oldest one I ever got was over 30 years old when I was able to obtain a sample from someone who had died during dissection. So don't give up hope. And genetic counselor can really help you navigate that process too. So I'll put up a link to, a handout about how to find a genetic counselor if that's something that you would find helpful. Okay, back to our questions. Okay, so this is a great question that pertains to this. Do parents have a right to request this tissue sent, or only the spouse? Typically, I believe it's the next of kin. So that would be the spouse if the person is married, typically, unless there's some unique circumstances. I don't know if you have any other thoughts to share on that one, Bella.
No, it's the next of kin. So if they're legally married, spouse is the one who has the rights.
Yeah.
Like you said, unless there's an unusual scenario, maybe if the parent had the power of attorney or legal guardian, then in those scenarios we can. But for the most part, it's next of kin, which would be the spouse.
Yeah. Okay. That one is answered. Here's the next one. I had my genetic test in July 2018. So it sounds like maybe this person participated in the research. Wayne, I don't know if you want to answer. Did you, by genetic test, do you mean you participated in research at 2018, or you went to a doctor or genetic counselor and had genetic testing done clinically? Because that would be two different answers. So maybe, Bella, you want to answer the research portion.
Yeah. Well, if it was clinical genetic testing ordered by a provider, we do recommend genetic follow-up every 3 to 5 years because there might be new genes available for testing. So if you've last had clinical genetic testing in 2018, then it might be good to check in with your genetics team and see if there's new genes available for you to for testing. Or if there is a variant of uncertain significance, maybe we could check on the classification of that variant for you. But on the research side, I can't 100% guarantee that you will not ever need to resubmit. So if we need a new sample, you can always reach out to us. We'll reach out to you to collect the additional sample, but sometimes participants reach out to us, we check their chart, we find out we do need another saliva sample. So you're welcome to check in with us. And then we can send a new kit. But if you haven't heard from us about any results since 2018, it's very, we have not found a gene to report back yet. So this is where we're still kind of in that cycle of trying to put together all the pieces of the puzzle to find the causative gene. So there's not necessarily so we will report out if we do find a gene, but it's not necessarily like if you check in with us, we say this is where you're at right now in the study, because they're all different pieces of the lab working together. I'm the clinical side working on the record, so that's what I do for this study. But the update would be more just if you have something for us, or if you're found to have a gene that we will report back to you from our end. So,
okay. He replied in the chat that he did it in Dr. Milewicz's office. So it sounds like he probably had clinical testing then.
Then message me.
Message, yeah. Send a message. Okay, so I think those are the questions that came up, and he's going to go ahead and do that. So look out for him. Great. So we have one final little. We have one more here. I won't put it up yet because it's not marked. Okay, we have a few more. I just want to answer the questions before we do the FAQ, just in case we don't get to them all. So let's put up this one. Are there specific triggers that cause a mutation to manifest as aortic aneurysm dissection?
So that's what we're trying to learn. Part of the research program is we're finding the genes, but we also want to learn how the gene expression or the building of the protein is triggered by something to maybe make the cell express a little bit differently. So that is something that there still needs to be more research on, as far as, that's part of the sub-study that we want to we are starting to work on is the environmental triggers that can work with the gene to cause the dissection. So as far as right now, we know the biggest risk factors is high blood pressure, but that's a biomechanical force as opposed to a genetic trigger. So it's the pressure of the blood hitting the aortic wall, and then the gene that's already causing the aortic wall to not be as strong. And so together, that cocktail.
Yeah, got it. And then I'll just add that pregnancy also for pregnant folks can be another trigger there. So if anyone is at risk and they are thinking about becoming pregnant, please talk to your doctor beforehand to make sure that your aorta is healthy. Okay, what else do we have? Answered one more. All right. My mother and I share missense mutation found clinically. She had dissection aneurysm. I have aneurysm. We have 3 children who've had no testing. Okay, so sounds like they have a known genetic predisposition to disease, and she has 3 adult children. So what would you recommend for those kids?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer it 2 ways because we're not completely sure. So if it's a variant of uncertain significance, and even if the mutation is found in both of you, depending on the genes, this is where you'd have to kind of go to your genetic counselor or genetics team. But for the most part, VUSs, we would still recommend imaging for the first degree relatives. So it would be, your siblings, your mom's siblings, your children. It would be an echo or a gated CT scan as long as the whole ascending aorta is visualized, especially if they're between the ages of 25 and 32 and have not had imaging. This is if it's a VUS, that we would recommend at least they have that baseline echo, especially because you both had the ascending the aneurysm in the same spot and the ascending. But if there was a causative gene, so it's pathogenic, likely pathogenic, and mom and yourself, then your children would talk to their, find their genetics provider or your genetics provider if you're all in the same area or state to arrange that testing so they can be checked to see if they carry that same genetic variant and then get the appropriate screening. So if you want, you can email us at the JRF email and we can review your results report and tell you a little bit about it. Yeah.
Okay, this person, I gave a blood sample for research in 2018. She had a type A dissection and AVM. Do I need to reconnect to learn if there's a genetic condition?
Okay, so this is a good question. We can't, until we find a gene, so I'm assuming that you might be unsolved because that's the majority of our cases. So until we find a gene, we can't say for certain that genetic cause is causing AVM and the dissection. And so we don't say, there is a connection unless maybe we do find the gene or you do have a known gene and we can say that this is what we've learned, this is what we've seen in our cohort for people who carry the gene. So if there's not a name to your gene yet, then it's not something that we would update and say. But we do encourage check-ins. So if you have specific questions and you want us to, check your chart, check with Dr. Milewicz, just see what's going on there, you can definitely reach out to us and we can answer your questions like this specifically. Because we won't reach out to you and say, yes, there's a connection between these. We'll say this is your gene, it can cause this. But yeah, if you have questions, we can answer and help you.
Okay. Another topic that's coming up in the chat, I won't pull up the question, is can families participate if they don't have a sample from the person who had the dissection? This unfortunately comes up a lot as sometimes the person doesn't want to participate or perhaps unfortunately they're deceased and there is no sample available.
Absolutely, the family is still eligible, especially with the history of dissection. So, we can still enroll the person post-mortem, at least to review the medical records if the next of kin is willing. But we could also, enroll the children, the parents of the person who passed away, because that would be helpful. It's not necessarily that it'd be strong, high chance of us finding a gene if we don't have the affected individual, but it's still useful. It's still a contribution to research, and we can still learn from the medical records and and perhaps even, like the additional family members, because they do have that 50% risk of passing it on to their children. So.
Okay. All right. We're running up to the hour. We're hitting questions. So we may save the frequently asked questions I can just post that separately to our YouTube channel and send you all a link because I do think it's a lot of great information, but I also, appreciate the people who are here asking questions. So I do want to make sure we address all of those. And we have a few more. So let's see, pull this one up. I had an aneurysm last year, had open heart surgery. Okay. So I won't read this whole out loud. You all can do that. But this is a great question because even people like Meredith in our opening video who had a dissection and has a super strong family history, some of her clinicians attributed her dissection to her pregnancy rather than the fact that she was the 5th person in 4 generations of her family to have a dissection. So I would love to have you address this, Bella. Is it possible to have high blood pressure and a genetic risk factor, or a genetic risk factor and be pregnant? Those things combined.
Yep, absolutely. I would say it depends on age. So if you're older, then it could be. I would still say I would still say that there's a small chance of genetic predisposition. But if you're younger, you had the dissection. We do know Dr. Eleftheriades, we did one of our webinars, talked about emotional stress and how it could also drive up the blood pressure, which is further weakening the aortic wall if you're already have a weak aortic wall. So the genetic predisposition together with high blood pressure is commonly, what we find that triggers a dissection. So even I'm saying you had genetic testing done. Yeah, so we don't know if it was a gene that hasn't been discovered yet. So it wasn't on the testing panel. So we could talk to you more about it if you reach out to us, give you some more info and guidance on that.
I put up a link here to our YouTube channel. You can also find it by putting John Ritter Foundation in YouTube, and you will see our previous webinars, including the one Bella referenced with Dr. Eleftheriades. And you'll also see one from a genetic counselor named Andrea Rideout, who I believe 2 months ago presented at our webinar. And she has a lot of good information about what your test results mean, mainly that the negative result does not mean that we can rule out it being caused by a genetic predisposition, which is a really common misconception, even in medicine. Even some doctors or other providers have that misconception. So please do check out, especially that webinar. You will get a lot of info about that. And then, as Bella says, contact them if you have questions.
Yeah, when
and just for those asking questions, if you could try to keep them as short as possible, just so we can get through the rest of these. I know you all want to share your stories, but I want to make sure I get everyone. And we've got one here. Okay. Brother, 50, my brother had a ruptured aneurysm. Very sorry to hear that he passed away. Okay, so it sounds like an affected brother was tested, and sadly, another brother passed away from dissection, but nothing's found. I'm not sure the last question.
I think asking if your samples are still helpful for the research study. That's what I'm getting from it. But yeah, if you all provided the samples to us, we're still reviewing data from all our participants who are enrolled. So it might be helpful to get updated history if it's been a while since you've talked with us, and we could talk about the status of your family in the study.
Yeah, and again, if it's possible to get a postmortem study from your brother who passed away, that could be a helpful sample to have as well. So even if it was a few years ago, it would be worth looking for. But I'm glad that you are continuing to be screened, and so are the next generation of people. Okay, someone is asking about privacy, which is one of the frequently asked question portions that we're covering in this other video I'm mentioning that, again, will be on our YouTube, linked here. And I think a lot of people have concerns and questions about this because privacy, confidentiality, those are very reasonable concerns to have when you participate in any research, much less something about your genes. Nothing could be more personal than your DNA. So again, we'll have this in the video, so please stay tuned to that. But I know Bella knows the answer too, so I'm putting her on the spot to answer.
All right, I do this like every day because it's part of the consent call that we do. But we do our best to protect your confidentiality and your records, because we are working with medical records and your genetic information. So one way that we protect your DNA is that we de-identify the samples. So they're those numbered tubes. So when they're sequencing DNA, they don't know whose it is when they're working with it. We tie it back to you if we have a gene to report back. And then medical records, again, stored on our secure UT Health servers. So it's the same protection that you'd get with regular online medical care. How they have their online systems. It's the same protection with us in the research study. There are times where we may collaborate with other institutions or researchers to see if we're finding similar variants in our cohorts. And so if we do send any data externally, it's going to be de-identified. We're going to share the least amount of information needed. So we're not going to share your name, your date of birth, your address. We're not going to share your study ID. The least amount of information needed to collaborate goes. And then there's, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. So the least amount of information needed goes if we're working externally. I was gonna say publications. We don't share any names or identifying information. We don't sell our genetic data. We don't share with insurance companies or your doctors unless you give us permission to. So any information that comes from the study and affects you goes directly to you and not to anybody else. No family member, no insurance company, no doctor, unless you give us written permission to do that.
I'm sort of in a unique situation because, as probably many of you on the call know, I used to work for the John Ritter Research Program. I used to be a colleague of Bella's in person in Dr. Milewicz's office. And now I work for the John Ritter Foundation, which, as we learned through this webinar, is a separate entity. And so as an employee of the John Ritter Foundation, I do not have access to any information about people who have participated in research anymore. So oftentimes people will email me because they remember I worked there, or they're confusing the John Ritter Foundation with JRP and say, hey, can you tell me if I'm enrolled? And I can't, because I don't have access to that information, even though I previously worked there. And of course, I do recognize some of your names because I was lucky enough to work with many of you. But the John Ritter Foundation, even though we fund research at the John Ritter Research Program, even I'm messing it up, we do not have access to your medical information or any of your DNA or any of those pieces of information. So even as a funder, we have a strong wall in between those groups. Okay, and we are at the hour, so I think I'm going to call it there. I'm going to put up, so in the handout tab, looks like a lot of you already clicked on it, but there's information about how to access a genetic counselor. John Ritter Research Program can also help you with that, but all the information in that handout is basically what you'll get from them, so just try there first. I did want to ask one last question while y'all are here, which is about Aortic Dissection Awareness Week. As most of you all know, it was last week. So I'd love to hear if any of you participated in any way, even if that means sharing something on your social media, talking to your friends and family or your work colleagues, attending at one of our in-person symposiums or anything else. I'd love to just hear if folks were able to participate. The recordings from the symposiums, 2 of them, will be available also on our YouTube page. We're just doing a little bit of editing and trying to make it a more condensed version because it was several hours long. So we want to make it easily accessible to everyone. And then the last question I wanted to ask you all was about what you all are interested for future topics. So I'm putting these in the polls now. I'm going to leave this on for just a few minutes so that you can all complete them if you wish. And then I'll close the screen after a few minutes just so we can shut it down there. But we want to serve your needs and provide information that you all are interested in, not necessarily what we think you're interested in. So we appreciate your feedback. You're always also welcome to share it with me. info@johnritterfoundation.org is the general email address that I get. So a big thank you to Bella for being here and sharing all this amazing info with us today. One takeaway, I hope you all understand now that the John Ritter Foundation and the John Ritter Research Program are separate groups. We are sister organizations. We partner closely. I am lucky enough to talk to Bella all the time about our initiatives that we work together on, but we are separate. So hopefully we can all take away with that. And thanks to Maura in the chat as well.
Yeah, I do want to mention, JRP, the research program where I'm at with Dr. Milewicz, we are research. We are just research, or clinic if you come to clinic. But the John Ritter Foundation, where Ellen and Meredith they are the ones who are working tirelessly to increase resources for the community, as well as advocate for you all, educate the community and physicians. So they are doing much of the legwork.
We equally important parallel paths to helping to end suffering due to dissection, which is what we are all here to do. So lastly, thank you all for attending on this Friday, and I will go ahead and end it here. Again, check this out on YouTube. Just put John Ritter Foundation in. You'll find all of the videos there. This should be up later today, this recording, and let us know if you have any questions. Thanks for attending, everyone.
Thank you.